If you're wondering why people are considering wagon bodies on ute chassis in 2022, I think the fact that this vehicle type has come so far could prove you wrong. Considering how archaic that technology is underneath, these cars are now actually quite sophisticated to drive to an extent. Case in point being the new generation Isuzu MU-X. This is now the second best selling large SUV in Australia behind the Toyota Prado, even though the Toyota has sold 3 times the amount of this car, but this is by far and away the best-selling wagon on a ute chassis, followed by the Pajero Sport, then the Everest, although when the new one comes, I can imagine that really doubling those sales, to be honest, and then the Toyota Fortner over here, which was facelifted in mid-2020, and in here, in top-spec Crusade form, is only slightly more expensive than the new MU-X in mid-spec LSU form. So that's what we're here to test. Is the new generation MU-X in mid-spec LSU form at $61,400 good value for money compared to the top-spec Fortuner Crusade at only a little bit more, $62,945, both of which though are way under what a top-spec Toyota Prado would cost. As for what we're dealing with here, this Toyota Fortuner, and I say Fortuner, that's because the tyres say Fortuner, that's where this car is built, rather than Fortuna, which to me sounds weird, but let us know what you think in the comments. I'm going to say Fortuner, so I'll apologise in advance. The Toyota Fortuner was internationally launched in this generation in 2015 alongside the current Hilux. So this is the midlife facelift of that model, launched in Australia in August 2020. This Isuzu MU-X is the latest generation car. It only appeared in Thailand in late 2020, went on sale here in mid-2021, so this is clearly a newer generation car than the Toyota, and you can see that in a couple of ways. I think mainly it's the sizing of both vehicles, because these are 7-seat body-on-frame four-wheel drives. This Isuzu here is on a 110mm longer wheelbase, and as we shall see when we're in the vehicle, it does alleviate quite a bit more space than the Toyota. As for a couple of other vital statistics, while the Fortuner has more power and torque than the Isuzu, it actually doesn't tow quite as much. It only has 3,100 kilos braked towing capacity, 3,500 kilos for the Isuzu. This also has 216mm ground clearance versus 235 in the MU-X, and for wading depth, if you're brave enough to do that, it's 700mm in the Toyota, 800mm in the Isuzu. And as for weight, despite the Isuzu being slightly bigger, the Fortuner Crusade weighs 5 kilos more than the mid-spec MU-X. Now, Isuzu and Toyota don't claim the exact same type of boot measurement. So what we're going to do here is talk about the boots and then see how many soccer balls we can fit in there. The Isuzu is the slightly bigger wagon, so it does have greater depth. It's much deeper for me to reach the back seat from here, and its third row seats actually fold flat down into the floor, which gives this nice flat area, nice and deep, and it has a couple of features that the Toyota doesn't have. It has a 12-volt outlet here, it has a bunch of luggage tie-down points here, here, and here, and its top tether for the middle back seat is actually at the base of the backrest. It also has an electric tailgate, but it doesn't have quite the same headroom as the Toyota. When we switch over to here, see we noticeably have more room here. We've also got a speaker in the rear tailgate for the 11-speaker stereo in this car. Whether it's the subwoofer or just a random speaker, I don't know, but it's better than nothing. In here though is a very different story. Like the Isuzu, the Fortuner has an underslung spare wheel, but unlike the Isuzu, it doesn't have rear seats that fold into the floor. They clip onto the sides here like a sort of a 90s or 2000s kind of four-wheel drive rather than double tumbling, and it's much easier for me to touch the backrest here from here, showing that it actually doesn't have the same amount of depth. It also doesn't really have any features beyond that speaker. It just has 2 carry hooks here, and that's kind of it. So here, comfortably filled to the top of the second row backrest with plenty of vision through the side windows and out through the tailgate here, we can easily fit 63 soccer balls in the boot of the MU-X and still close the electric tailgate. Intriguingly, considering that the Fortuner has these prehistoric seats that clip up on the side, it actually takes 67 balls, and that's because it has a dip down underneath the second row there for the feet for these passengers in the back, so it can actually feed a bit down, and the tailgate here is thinner, so we can pack the balls right to the edge, and when we close it, it doesn't knock any of them out. Being the newer of the two vehicles, the MU-X LSU is much more modern inside. The general architecture of the dash, certainly with this padded vinyl stitched muffin top is what I call it, that sort of adds this sort of nice squidginess to it that isn't really matching the doors. These are smooth to touch, but they're rock hard. But this is generations ahead of the old model. This is a much more habitable and livable car. In terms of the things like the seating, we do have cloth seats in this LSU spec. If you want leather and electric adjustment, you need to go to the LST, and that's beyond $67,000. So $6,000 more than this and way beyond the Fortuner Crusade. So that's why we're in this model here. This seat has all manual adjustment and no height adjustment. This one has crank handle height adjustment and electric lumbar. Even though it's manual, it is really comfortable. The leather on the steering wheel feels great, and the general driving position is actually really good. We even have these little padded vinyl sections here so your leg can rest against the center console while you're driving, and you can do long distances in this car and feel good. It has a lot of storage things as well. It has a dual glove box here with another little flap up here. It has pop-out cup holders from the dash here for both the driver and the passenger over there. It easily fits pretty decent sized bottles in the doors here. And as for the multimedia, we have a 9-inch touchscreen here with wireless Apple CarPlay that does take a while to boot up, but with 8 speakers, it does sound really strong. Perhaps not as strong as the surround sound one in a D-Max Ute, but still really good. We have a USB port here and a 12-volt outlet. The rest of the general interior is as per what you would expect. I would say though that the instruments look a little bit cheap. I don't think they quite match the rest of the look. This, if it was redone, would make this look like another level again, which is kind of what a Mazda BT50 looks like because it has its own instruments. So maybe that's something for the future. But this strip here with the HVAC and all those buttons, super slick, really nice, lovely and cold, very easy to use. The final thing I should point out though is that unlike the MY22 D-Max, the MU-X still does not have lane assist disablement from the steering wheel. We've just got steering assist here that we can turn on and off, but I am clearly not smart enough to work out how to go through this system, stopped or moving, and work out how to turn the lane assist off. Please let us know in the comments below if you know how to, because it can be very overzealous and annoying. Like the front row, the second seat in the MU-X is surprisingly sophisticated. It is much, much more comfortable than the old generation car. There's heaps of legroom. The floor feels like it's lower. It's a much better package vehicle, and this seat itself is really supportive. I've got plenty of under-thigh support, not perfect, but still pretty good. The backrest is good. It's got a 12-position angle. This is currently probably a bit further back than I'd like it, but it's still great. It's my option if I want to do it. And even getting in and out of it with these big B-pillar handles, standard side steps, that sort of thing, makes this very useful four-wheel drive. My view over the front is elevated and great, and even though that seat doesn't adjust for height, it's still not too out of alignment with the drivers. We have little cool things like this 4-kilo hook here that can hold takeaway or a bag when you're driving, so you can reach back and grab something. We also have dual map pockets. We have a little armrest here with a pair of pop-out cup holders in the middle here, and we also have roof-mounted air vents that are not only controlled by a 3-speed fan just here, that also controls the third row, but can be turned off if kids are going nuts with that by the driver just down there. Where the MU-X really scores though is in the third row. Even though it's usually an afterthought, like it is in the Fortuner, here it is very much part of the packaging of the car. This is completely doable for adults. I'm even more elevated than the second row, got an amazing view. The seat has pretty good support underneath my bum. The cloth is of the same quality as the rest of the interior trim, not some cheapo vinyl version. The backrest on both sides adjusts to 12 positions, just like it does here. And the way these seats tumble for you to get in is so easy that it just makes everything a breeze. And speaking of which, you've also got 2 air vents in the roof. Given that 5 years separates the design of the new MU-X and the Toyota Fortner, it's interesting how many little details they share in their cabin. Both have these sizable A-pillar grabs. They both have double glove boxes, although the Crusade version of the Fortner has a padded section here, and you use the badge to open it, which is kind of cool, and it's much bigger than the Isuzu's. The bottom is also bigger, so that's definitely a benefit. They both also have these little pop-out cup holders in the dash here, on both sides, and even the stitching down the side of the console here, which here you don't quite collect with your knee like you do in the Isuzu, so it's not really for padding, it's more for visual. That sort of stuff is all quite similar. What we're looking at here though is a Crusade version. This is the top spec Fortuner, not the mid-spec MU-X. So even though this is only $1,500 more expensive, there is a bunch of stuff in here that does elevate it beyond its Isuzu competitor. Starting with these seats. They are leather-faced. It's not the highest quality leather in the world, but leather it is, and they both are fully electric and both 8-way adjustable, which means that even this one can go up and down, also under thigh support, but they don't have any lumbar adjustment like the electric adjust for the driver in the MU-X. Some of the other interior parts aren't quite there, like the dash top, and generally the dash shape is very Hilux, meaning this is rock hard. It does have a little padded, tiny little sliver of a section in front of the driver, but you can't see it, it's blocked by the steering wheel. And speaking of which, this leather doesn't feel as nice as the Isuzu's. It's much rougher and grainier. And this wood section in here, when I say wood, I mean wood. If that's wood, then I'm Kanye West, because when you drive around in it, you can hear like Kanye's rings would be clacking on that thing too. And all the wood in the center here, it's all got a big scratch in here as well. It's just yuck, really. It doesn't look very good. The storage is roughly the same. We can still fit this in both doors. We've got a pair of cup holders in here, and we've got a little bin here. I think the padding on this thing is arguably better than the Isuzu's, but it's so close. A few little details in the Toyota though do stand out. It does have 4 auto up-down power windows, where only the driver gets that in the Isuzu. And while the driving position is roughly similar, the wheel doesn't go in and out as much. The dash is much shallower and you do feel a little bit more hemmed in, but you do get steering wheel paddles in the Crusade, which is kind of cool. Being the top spec model, it also has a few little extra embellishments. This 8-inch touchscreen here runs wired Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, so not wireless, but it doesn't have wireless charging, and neither does the Isuzu. What the Toyota has is an 11-speaker JBL stereo that is better than the Isuzu's, but not by a huge amount. It's just a bit better. So you have the tailgate speaker, you have these little squashed hamburger speakers on tops of the dash here, you have dedicated tweeters in the doors. It is another level up from what is in its competitor. You also have a pair of seat heating here, and you have 1 USB port and a 12-volt outlet and that sort of stuff. Everything else is pretty much the same. It just doesn't have quite the same level of cohesion. It's mixing nicely padded surfaces with really quite grainy and hard stuff. And to me, it clearly seems like a ute that's had a lot of embellishment on it. Although one area that I do really like is the instruments. They're both this lovely blue metallicized look. They're really quite classy. They are way nicer than the junky dials in the Isuzu. Aside from the obvious, which is the leather face trim in this Crusade, it's fairly similar in the second row to the back of Isuzu, but not quite as roomy. It does feel like a narrower car. You can feel that the windows and the pillows are a little bit closer to you sitting here. I am sitting nicely elevated, just like I am in its competitor, but it just isn't quite as open and as luxurious. Now, having both front seats being fully electric means that the front passenger is down and at the same height as the driver, but that wasn't such an issue in the Isuzu anyway. And where the LSU only had one of these, a 4-kilo one on the front passenger's backrest, we also have one on the driver for the Toyota. It has 2 map pockets like its competitor, but it doesn't have the pair of USB ports like the Isuzu has here. It only has a 12-volt outlet there. It does include, though, a 220-volt, 100-watt, 3-prong charger down here. If I can get the thing open, that is good for charging laptops and stuff. That's very useful. The center seat, again, is doable, but you are very close to the headlining here. It doesn't have as much headroom here, even though it does have very similar knee room, given that the wheelbase is shorter, and reasonable toe room. We have got air vents in the ceiling, although this time it's not just by a fan control, it is actually digital. It has an auto here with a temperature gauge here, and that controls these two and the two in the seat behind me. Both of these backrests are adjustable. They only go in 8 positions, not 12, because they are butting in to the third row seats that are currently flipped up and against the rear windows. And as for storage, we have this that easily fits into the door and an armrest here, an armrest in the center here, and a pair of cup holders right there. And once you're in here, it's actually not as bad as you might expect. Having that dip down in the floor that took all those soccer balls when we were doing the boot test means I've got quite a lot of footroom in here. The legroom's quite okay with this seat moved a little bit forward, and my headroom's just okay with a pair of air vents here, but it is a lot more claustrophobic than the MU-X, and it is definitely not as holistic in the way that all of this seating arrangement operates. The official combined fuel consumption figure for the Toyota Fortner is 7.6 litres per 100 kilometres compared to 8.3 in the Isuzu MU-X. However, in our testing, the Isuzu was actually slightly more economical and drank a little bit less diesel at 8.9 litres per 100 compared to 9.4 litres per 100 kilometres in the Toyota. The warranty for both cars is 5 years or unlimited kilometres in the Toyota, 6 years or 150,000 in the Isuzu. And as for servicing, there is quite a bit of difference because the Isuzu can be serviced every 12 months or 15,000 kilometres, whereas the Fortner needs servicing every 6 months or 10,000 Ks. Over the past 12 months, the median budget direct customer paid $972 to comprehensively insure a Toyota Fortner or $883 to comprehensively insure an Isuzu MU-X. However, everybody's situation is different and your premium is going to vary on these two vehicles based upon things like where you live, your driving history, and whether you garage your car. Now let's address the elephant in the room to begin with the MU-X, and that is its lane keeping assist system, which I couldn't find earlier on the touchscreen, and that's because it's buried in the instrument pack between these not so pretty dials, and you can only access it when the car is stopped, which is really annoying. That's been removed from the D-Max Ute. It is now accessible only via the little steering wheel button on here. You just hold it down and it all goes away. But in the coil sprung wagon, it is still there and it is ever present. It is very persistent and it is really quite amateur at times in the way that it nudges you around. The steering assist is also quite insistent when it's turned on. But you know, if you need those things to sort of make you feel confident in a car, then it has that stuff. The other thing is the stability control system in the MU-X. It is there, of course, but in tight corners like here, where you're trying to add a bit of power down in really tight stuff, once it starts working out that you're engaging the EC too much, it just kind of keeps clamping on. Like in situations where you're on hairpins, towing something, stuff like that, you need to drive very gingerly to make that go away, though you can turn it off by pushing the button here. So that's all gone. They're all the annoying things about this car. As for the rest of it, it's really good. So it's a pity that those things sort of tarnish much of the driving experience of the MU-X. Its driving dynamics, and in particular the creaminess and the consistency of its steering, are so much better than the Fortner. Even if you felt that, I braked down a hill, the transmission shifted down a gear, the calibration of this 6-speed automatic and the old 3-litre 4-cylinder turbo diesel engine are so much better than before. It's now working with you the whole time. It'll hold a gear going up hills, it's much more refined, the way that the engine is tuned, maximum torque of 450 Newton meters from 1600 to 2600 RPM is a nice broad span, and even though that's 50 Newton meters less than the Toyota, in a car that's actually barely any lighter or heavier than the other, they're the same weight, it doesn't really seem to make that much of a difference. I think that the refinement for the MU-X most of the time wins out over that extra little bit of punch that the Fortner has. So it's up to you what you prefer, but I actually think I like the quietness of this car because it blends with the way it drives so well. Going along these country roads here where we are, we're in a body on frame, live axled, four-wheel drive, but it has coil springs at the back end, it has proper axle location, it has been nicely damped, and it just has a fluency and a balance to it that it never used to have. It actually feels neutral in corners. It tends to understeer a little bit if you push it too much, at which point the AC stops you anyway, but it is just a nice, flowing, relaxing car for its type. This is not a proper competitor to a monocoque SUV, but this, for this sort of vehicle, is really good. There's also a feeling of expense in the way that the MU-X is holistic. Like, We're sitting in the cloth seats with manual adjustment, but they're in the right place. The steering wheel leather on the wheel feels really nice and soft and expensive, unlike that sort of grainy crap that's in the Toyota. And it just has this broad dash expanse and this overall feel about it that makes it feel like a classier, arguably higher level of car, certainly in terms of size, than its Toyota rival, if not the actual trim level. But then you're really close to the Crusade spec here for $1,500 cheaper, and if you want to go to that next level, you've still got the LST to go. And while the 20-inch wheels do take away from the ride quality of this car, which is really one of the MU-X's fortes, they do add quite a lot to the way that it looks. It looks a lot classier and more expensive than this one on 18-inch wheels, and it also has electric driver's seat, thatched leather seats, other extra accoutrements that make it feel even more expensive again, even though I wish they would just junk this whole instrument pack and start again, which leads me to the final thing that the MU-X needs, and that is a really good polish by someone who really knows what they're doing. New lights, completely new calibration of the electronic systems, and just new details like this stuff here, like a few bits of trim, just to give it that little bit of extra polish and remove a little bit of that chintz, because this car, this 4Drive, is good enough to deserve to have all that stuff really hit home. Starting on the same topic, the Fortuner doesn't have the MU-X's junction A-B. It doesn't have steering assist either, but you can turn its lane assistance and lane departure stuff off by a button on the wheel here, which is hugely useful. And might I say again, the instruments in this car are beautiful, unlike they are in the Isuzu. The seat is also a little bit grabbier. It's got a lot of adjustment because it's an 8-way electric, but it's got a little bit more bolstering. So that's probably a good thing, because when it comes to the way that the Fortuner drives, regardless of updates in 2020, this is still a very patchy car that doesn't like patchwork surfaces. In faster corners, it feels like the front end and the back end aren't really connected, unlike the Isuzu, which flows really nicely. It tends to lean over in the front and is all about understeer. And the steering, it feels heavy at parking speeds, but too light when it's running. And so putting sport down here, because it's got eco, normal, and sport buttons, is really kind of pointless, other than the fact that it adds weighting, but it doesn't stop that kind of lolling in the wheel that it has, which is just kind of ugh. Given how nicely for this vehicle type the MU-X drives, it's such a shame that the Fortuner doesn't have that. I think that's the biggest issue with the way its dynamics are. Then I suppose there's its ride. It's only on 18-inch wheels in this top spec model. Thank God it doesn't have 20s, because it would be absolutely terrible. It just patters around and drops into bumps and crashes through sometimes, and just doesn't have the smoothness or the refinement or the sophistication of the way the Isuzu drives. And saying that sentence is something I would imagine I would never have said, but it's actually true in 2022. Now, the engine is stronger, it has more punch, it has a sport mode here that you can flick the transmission across to. When you hit it, it has that torque kick, but it also has that very vocal diesel grumble that it shares with a Hilux. So it does the job, but it doesn't really do it with the amount of slickness. Thank you, that was the lane assist beeping away. It just doesn't have that sophistication and that finesse that I think that it needs. So even though it's quick, and even though it has all this equipment and tinsel on this model, it still kind of drives like a slightly less good Hilux. And I don't know whether that's really what these sort of wagons are about. It's meant to have a coil-sprung rear end and be a little bit more polished and refined, and I suppose some of the things that it does, like the seating and the way that it sits and kind of the way it all strings everything together, isn't as clumsy as I was expecting. But then here we are on a country road, and all of the things that hit home the most, which is just its lack of refinement in the way that it drives across surfaces of all kinds, is just kind of second rate. And it's 2022, it's not 2015. And I think the only thing that is going to save the Fortuner in that regard is a whole new generation of model. There are three clear areas where the Isuzu MU-X LSU is a significantly better SUV 4-drive than the Toyota Fortner Crusade. The first of those is the fluency and the refinement of its driving experience, particularly its steering. The second is its overall space, and the third is its holistic use of the way it's packaged in terms of its seating flexibility, its overall comfort, and just the way it works in general as a four-wheel drive. It's actually a really good thing and an enormous step up from its predecessor. But there is something to be said for spending $1,500 more on the Fortner Crusade. It's not as good a car overall as the Isuzu, certainly not in terms of the refinement and the way that it drives and handles or rides, but it does have that great stereo. It does look quite special from the outside, definitely a higher spec model than this one here, and it does have Toyota's service reliability and all of that dealership expertise to back this car up. So it is more expensive to service, but there are more places to get it serviced. But at the end of the day, if you want the best car here, this is it. And if you want more bling than that, buy the LST. If you haven't subscribed, please do so below the video, hit the notification bell and leave a comment on what you think about the Isuzu MU-X or the Toyota Fortner and which one you think might be the best or on chasing cars. Thanks for watching.